Right, welcome everybody, and if you do have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please, thank you very much. Massive welcome back to Julie Umpleby with how and why ancestral healing is vital for our growth and survival as a human race. And Julie tonight covers our ancestral lineage and suggests links within us to people long gone, at least physically, via our little understood DNA. We evidently comprise more than our personal life experience and are thus urged to consider our current behaviour, as this contributes to the collective unconscious forever, with implications for future generations and mankind. Julie runs a website which is all the W's, diamondlightworld.net. Please welcome Julie Umpleby.
Sorry, just had to flip the switch. Is that transmitting? Okay, Rob, thank you very much, and I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me back here, and thank you to everybody for coming out this evening. I don't know how many of you have seen the earlier presentations that I've done in respect of the diamond and diamond light world. Okay, and how the octahedron actually serves a very, very valuable function in our healing, in our lives, in our spiritual and physical evolution. And it was really my work with the diamond, which has taken place over the last decade, which brought me finally into the realms of ancestral healing, despite having had done energy work for 16 years, and actually coming from a country as in South Africa, where I lived for 30 years, where the indigenous peoples honor and work with the ancestors as a natural part of their culture, of their life, of their practices. For me, having come from a scientific background and having done what I've done, the ancestral world just didn't even feature in anything. To me, it was just a rather quaint part of their practice, a rather quaint tradition, you know, and my understanding was that these people worshipped their ancestors, and I just couldn't see the logic. I was a scientist, you know, I was looking for the ways in which life worked. I wanted to know what made life work. So when the ancestral realms actually started communicating to me in some very, very unusual ways, it really made me sit up and take notice. And if somebody had said to me 5 years ago that I would be standing in front of you talking about ancestral healing and ancestors, I would have actually left them out of the room, basically. So I hope you're going to enjoy the brief amount that I've actually just put together for you this evening, just to really scratch the surface of understanding, because we're not only talking about ancestral lineages from the perspective of our own family, our familial links. We're talking ancestral connections and the understanding of the depth and the breadth of the interconnectedness of the human race. And obviously going into why this is significant for us and why it's really important as an aspect of our own healing to sit up and take notice and to work with this as one of the components of our life going forward and one of the components of our healing. Let me just get this out. I love this image that I just chose for the front, because that really, this sort of glyph, if you like, speaks to me about the circle of life, and it's the circle of all of life. It's that which connects us all. It's the world tree, if you like, that is carried within the circle, not just an up and a down, but a left and a right, and all of the roots and the branches intertwined and completely interdependent of each other. And that is really what we are all about as a human race, and that's how and where the work with our ancestral component actually takes us, is into that level of interconnectedness. And as far as I'm concerned, our search for the truth, whatever that may be, you know, this is a truth meeting. All of you guys are just really interested, and you've had some amazing speakers here, interested in the truth at all levels. And ultimately, our search for the truth is going to bring us back to ourselves and back to our place in the world, and understanding what our role in life is and our true self, and the ancestors in this realm are actually a vital aspect of that. So I just love this glyph because of the interconnectedness of it all, and I also, of course, loved, you can see what's sitting right in the middle of it. And when I found that, I thought, well, that's just perfect, because it's the diamond, if you like, that manages the flow of information throughout the universal fabric. So we're talking about the flow of information across time and space, and even across different dimensions. So that's a brief introduction. Those of you who have actually been here for one of my previous presentations will have seen this before, so I don't really want to go through it in detail. That's my background. My accent is different because it's from 30 years in South Africa, although I am English born. And my background was science. I spent, you know, sort of 19, 20 years in petrochemicals. I did botany and zoology as a degree, but I think that's what influenced me in terms of wanting always to understand how life worked. And that's really been my driving factor in everything that I've done. How does life work? What makes me me? What makes you you? You know, how does all of this work with us all together? And then I've spent 16 years in what you might call the holistic healing field. I just call myself basically an energy worker because I work with energies at multiple levels and in multiple ways. And especially everything now is colored by, influenced by, and fed by and through the octahedral diamond fabric. Okay, it puts us in touch with our soul essence. So here we've got, you know, sort of fantastic depiction of a family tree. And this is a quote from a lady called Denise Lynn. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her. She is one of the indigenous peoples. Well, she has indigenous heritage. I think she has Native American blood in her. That's her heritage. And of course, around the world, most of the indigenous cultures have actually kept this concept, this connection, and this understanding of ancestors and ancestry and the value and the role that they play. They've kept that alive in all of their practices and traditions. So Denise Lynn has done a lot of work in this respect, and she's got a book called Descendants, and it really focuses a lot on healing ourselves so that our descendants are not carrying forward into life all of the traumas that up until now we have actually been programmed with. And she says, the choices that we make in life are not unique to us. So hey ho, there blows our, you know, illusion of how much we are in control of our lives basically out of the water. So our choices are not unique, they're not our own. They are a distillation of all that has come before us, everything that has come before us. The more we become aware of our ancestral lineage, the more freedom we will have to honor what is best and let go of the rest. And she's talking specifically here about her familial lineage, so this is like a family tree, but I want to take your concept of your connection with that lineage, as I said earlier, way broader than that. Okay, and take you into the human race, basically. But this is the concept. And the indigenous peoples have kept it alive all over the world. Now, there's one thing. Have any of you seen the movie Cloud Atlas? Okay, we got one hand. Couple of hands up. Okay. If you haven't seen the movie, watch it. Because that movie speaks to everything that we are actually talking about here. It also covers this concept of past lives, but of threads actually running through and crisscrossing timelines, that we are never free of them until we stop and we take notice and we make different choices in our lives. But Cloud Atlas is one of the most brilliant movies. I've watched it 3 or 4 times already. And every time I go back, I see something different in it. There's something else that catches my eye that I didn't see the first time. So even if you've watched it once, go back again. These are some of the quotes from the movie, the wisdoms. There are just amazing wisdoms in this movie. Our lives are not our own, and they're not. From womb to tomb, we are bound to others. So we like to think in this modern Western society that we've become individuated. We are individuals, and of course, that is the programming that's actually promulgated to the detriment of the interconnectedness and the survival of the human race. We think we're individual. We are bound to others, past and present, and by each crime and every kindness, we birth our future. In every single moment, we have an opportunity to change what is registered not only within our own DNA, but what gets sent out electromagnetically from our own DNA back into the collective. So with every choice that we make, we shift and we change the programming of the electromagnetic field that actually connects us all. And that's from that movie. One of the other quotes, which is brilliant: the world spins from the same unseen forces that twist our hearts. We can't always see what those guiding choices are, or those things are that are influencing us in our lives, and it behooves us to actually become ever more conscious of what is lurking within the shadows of our own human psyche. If there is any purpose that we all have in this life, it is to clean up our psyche, to clean up our unconscious, to make conscious that which is unknown, to bring it into the light, to actually bring healing. We cross and recross our old paths like figure skaters. And I love that. It's beautiful, because those who've perhaps had experience of, for want of a better description, past lives, you know, because you start looking at this and you start thinking, well, maybe it's not really a past life, because maybe it's a genetic memory or a soul memory that's been passed down through the DNA from time immemorial. So I wasn't reincarnated as Julius Caesar. I've got a part of the DNA configuration and patterning that he was bearing when he was alive. You know, and that crisscrosses lives right until we come to this moment in time where we have a choice of what we're actually going to do with that aspect that may be making itself manifest in our lives right now. The way that I actually saw this when all of the ancestral information actually started coming to light for me, which was 4 years ago, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment, was that I just saw timelines. This is long before, you know, Cloud Atlas and the movie and what have you. I just saw all of these timelines coming in from different directions and through the diamond, and it was in that moment was just this point of knowing that we, each human being that stands here right now, is a convergence point. You know, they say the truth is that now is the only moment that ever matters. We are that convergence point, the eternal now, and what we do in that eternal now actually does matter. So everything that had ever existed is converging in us in this moment in time. And it's a powerful thought, but getting to that point, we've crisscrossed all of those lines that were actually coming in. So we're holding it all within our beings at the moment. And there's some scientific evidence I want to show you as well about what people are finding out, what the scientists are finding out now about genetic memory, and not just instinctual memory, behaviors, beliefs. So it's not just your physical constitution that may be genetically imparted. You can actually inherit beliefs and patterns and behaviors. It's quite fascinating. So 4 years ago, what actually happened, I was with a friend and I was living in Wiltshire for a year. And of course, Wiltshire is a wonderful mystical place in general. You know, I won't talk about Glastonbury because I think Glastonbury is another kettle of fish. I think there are a few Glastonburys exist, and it depends on, you know, which particular timeline you tend to hit it on as to what your experience is. But generally, that area is an incredible area that holds an amazing amount of information. So bearing in mind that up until this point, I've been interested in the science of the diamond, in the spiritual understanding of the diamond, and the soul journey that it brings, and coming face to face with the soul. So ancestors didn't come into it. So one day during that year, sort of later on, we were actually invited, the lady that I was sharing a house with, we were invited to West Kennet Long Barrow. You guys familiar with some of the long barrows down there? They're generally thought of as burial chambers. But as an author by the name of Peter Knight, who's done an incredible amount of work on these long barrows in the Somerset and Wiltshire landscape. And what he has found is that they are orientated in the landscape in accordance with very, very precise and specific geometric configurations, is the first thing. They're also aligned with the stars and with the sun, so they have solar and stellar alignments and configurations. They also have various chambers within the barrows that, even though they found bones and what looked like evidence of them being used for burial ceremonies. They also had some very, very specific layouts and other tools that indicated that these barrows were in fact ancestral, honoring sacred places. So we got invited out to a drumming ceremony at West Kennet Long Barrow. First time I've ever done this. And off we went, because Peter Knight was doing a little bit of research and he wanted to know what the inputs were. And while we were there, sort of through the drumming and everything else, we had an encounter with an incredible ancestral being, and we got a name for him. It's not part of my personal lineage that I am in any way, shape, or form aware of, but it was an ancestral energy. And he started sharing with us some information about the alignment between West Kennet, Stonehenge, the communication stones, and all of the rest of it. And he has actually stayed with us since then for 4 years. So even then, Anne had the biggest connection with him. That was the friend that I was actually with. And I kind of left it with her. And it was so clear to her that she drew a picture of him and wonderful, and she started communicating with him, you know, in a mediumship kind of way, what you guys may understand as mediumistic communication. And she started communicating with him, and he was a shaman in nature that operated in the south of England. Previously, he had connections with the Phoenicians, and he'd actually worked in all of the sacred sites. Not only in the south of England, that was his base, but he had actually traveled to different parts of the UK as well. But the funniest thing for me was, I didn't really have this strong connection, but within days of that encounter, I was sitting in the kitchen the one day, and I suddenly became aware of this enormous black man standing next to me on the right-hand side. And I kind of like, I wasn't too sure about this until Anne said to me, I didn't say anything. She saw him, okay? And I kind of thought, all right, what's this all about now? You know, and what unfolded was that this guy was one of the ancestral guardians who was working with me. He was a Zulu shaman. The most beautiful energy that you can imagine. Very loving, very gentle, but very strong. You know, kind of individual you might think of as a big teddy bear. So this might sound a little bit woo-woo to some of you guys. And I mean, it was really interesting for me because this was our first experience of this, you know, nature as well. But what I found so fascinating following on from that was over time I started communicating and I asked for a name and I got given a name, and the name was Mhlumbi. Now I heard the name, and having lived in South Africa, I wrote the name down in a certain way because of the phonetics of the L sound actually would be written as like L, it was UML, Mhlum, UMBI or something. I wrote it down. And then I looked it up to see what it meant. And the meaning that I got was one who has a wart on his face. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's, you know, that's about par for the course for me. You know, there's like no great, wonderful names, you know, like Dancing Star Bear or anything like that. You know, it's one who has a wart on his face. That the interesting thing that happened with that was that probably about a week later, one of my contacts in Australia, of all places, actually emailed me and she says to me, did you hear the name or did you see it? I said, no, I heard it. So I wrote it down as I would actually write it down, you know, sort of having been in Africa. She says to me, because there's a different spelling and it has a completely different name. So I said, what? She gave it to me and I went and had a look, and that name meant magician. And the magicians of old were actually the shamans, those who actually worked sort of in the alternate realms, in those ancestral realms. And I knew that this guy was actually there for me to guide me into the ancestral realms and the ancestral understanding. But still I resisted, okay? So I still wasn't like overly interested in doing any of this work. And it got to sort of 2 months further on than that, with a number of other experiences, and I'm not going to sort of belabor the point, but I was connected with 2 other ancestral energies that just kind of like blew me away. And the one day I was sitting there in meditation, and the first one was a Native American grandfather, and everybody likes to think they've got a Native American guide. I've never been like that because I've actually never worked with guides, but there he was, but he looked really stern. he's not the kind of guy that you'd like to come face to face with because he doesn't muck about. You know, it was like really stern in front of me. And I looked and I kind of went, okay, I can see you. So what am I actually working with here? Let me have a name and help me to understand what this is all about. And I just heard white horse. So I went, okay, right, that's fine, I've got that one. And then I thought, all right, well, I've got 3 people now. They're all male and they're all working with me. And this guy was also a Native American shaman. So we're talking real serious shamanistic energy. So I've got Umshlumbi here, and I've got Whitehorse there, and I've got Albon who's standing on this side, and I haven't really got anything to do with him. And I thought, all right, we got 3 points of the diamond here. So you guys that have worked with me at the diamond, we've got 4 points as it anchors around you. Is there anything at the back? And I turned my attention round, and there was a cloaked guy, very, very quiet. And he was an Asian man. And I went, all right then, so give me a name. And the name I got was Su Ling. So I said, okay, right. So I came straight out of meditation, and I do what I usually do. I get on the internet and I Google it. You know, it's like, okay, so what does this mean? So now I've got 4 of them, and there's like 4 totally different cultures. They run across cultures. And here's this Su Ling at the back. So I get on the internet and I go and have a look. And couldn't find anything in terms of the interpretation for the name. But what I found on the further down the page in checking out the name meaning for Su Ling was a link to a place called the Su Ling Temple in China. And the Su Ling Temple is actually known as the Temple of the Ancestors, and it has been renamed the Lumen Temple, or the Temple of Light. So it's the Temple of the Ancestors and the Temple of Light. And it's flanked, apparently the entrance to this ancient temple is flanked by 2 deer. And that really clinched it for me, because that whole year down the house that we had, and we were staying down in Wiltshire, we'd actually had 2 deer from the neighboring conservancy that kept coming into our garden and eating the flowers. So I kind of went, all right, I give up, I got it. I got it, I'll work with them, I'll work with them. And thus started for me the journey with the ancestors, and I had 4 guardians, and they were all shamans, they were all sort of initiates, if you like, into the unseen realms that began to guide me through this process. So when I actually share some of this information with you, please know that a lot of it is actually from direct experience. So we've got some of the scientific validation for what this is, but over the last 4 odd years, I've had direct experience of connecting with these dimensions, if you like. And it's been quite jaw-dropping since the beginning. Roger Woolger is a Jungian trained psychotherapist and an author. And he actually has this to say. He says, ancestral memories are a part of us all. Traditionally, the universal memory has been called the Akasha. So we talk universal memory, we talk about this pool of information about humanity that sits in this collective unconscious, as Jung called it. So he calls it the Akasha, or the anima mind, or the world soul. Everything we are, everything we do, everything we think, everything we believe gets broadcast into this sort of repository, if you like, of information. Jung called it the collective or transpersonal unconscious, and repeatedly urged us to take more responsibility for the collective psychic imprints of mass traumas, of war, of famine, addictions, of sexual exploitation, slavery, poverty, oppression, mass migration, and cataclysm. And that's an interesting one to bear in mind as well. These have afflicted all of our histories for many, many centuries. Now, we might think something that happened 2 million years ago has absolutely no bearing on our life today. But the trauma that our ancestors went through as a consequence of global upheavals and global cataclysms was imprinted into the human psyche and has actually been passed down through genetic memory. So we carry that, okay? And we are responsible for healing that. And if there's one reason why I believe necessarily even believe, but know that ancestral healing is so critical for us at this juncture of the human race. It's because the human psyche has actually become fragmented almost beyond repair. We're almost at that moment, that space in time, where in the fragmentation, our power has been dissipated. Our power to change the course of events has become dissipated in amongst all the fragmentation. And it is only through our ancestral healing, doing that within each and every one of us, that we begin to bring and restore wholeness and harmony to the human race as a whole, and actually to life as it exists on this planet. Okay, so we think that we're not responsible for the war that happened 100 years ago. We are. We're still carrying it. We're carrying the memories. We're carrying the trauma. We are responsible for the healing of that. And what they're doing down at the Tower of London at the moment with that wonderful blood red sea of poppies, I think, just appalling. Have you guys seen it in a build-up to Remembrance Day with all of those ceramic poppies? You look at the visual. The minute they put the visual on screen, I just think, what are you trying to do? And that's imprinting again into everybody's minds.
It means, so it's kind of blood ritual, really.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's what they really mean.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, it is. And but that's being imprinted, you know. So what it's doing is it's reinforcing all of the trauma that is actually sitting in the collective unconscious. So we have to be extra super duper aware, you know, and that, you know, in our search for the truth, we do expand our awareness, and we need to use that awareness actually to facilitate our healing ultimately. So everything that we do takes us on that journey. So Roger Walker is a very, very interesting guy, Jungian trained. This, very interesting, was an article. Now we start getting into some of the substantiation and some of the science. And this is a headline. I think it appeared in the Daily Telegraph as well as the BBC News on the 1st of December 2013. So this is very recent. And it was headlined, "Memories Pass Between Generations." So it's the first time that scientists are really kind of acknowledging this. And they say behavior can be affected by events in previous generations which have been passed on through a form of genetic memory. As animal studies suggest, experiments showed that a traumatic event could affect the DNA in sperm and alter the brains and behavior of subsequent generations. And they found this in mice. Did anybody see this article when it came out? But what they found out was that a group of mice had actually been trained. So these are obviously monitored experiments. A group of mice had actually been trained to develop an aversion to a particular smell. And what they found was that the grandchildren of those mice actually held and carried the imprint of exactly that same aversion. It was being carried on generationally through the mice. And what they found was DNA changes in the sperm of the mice. So it's not only in the sperm, it's actually taking place in your cells. It's taking place in your all of the reproductive units, the eggs and the sperm. So Carl Jung, in terms of Jungian psychotherapy, he popularized the idea of a collective unconscious and that we are all plugged into it. And he suggested it as the repository of racial memories and universal archetypes. Now, you mention the word archetype to people, and very few people will understand what it means, you know. But they're universal symbols that everybody and every human being has a connection with, whether it be a shape, whether it be an image. But it's a repository of, it's an archetypal form that most of us have a kind of relationship with. With genetic research now proving the interrelatedness of all racial branches of humanity, we are all related. Listen to this. This gets so interesting. We are all related at some point in the past with Caesar, Sitting Bull, Nelson Mandela, Confucius, and Uncle Tom Cobley. Whoever Uncle Tom might be. The genetic transmission of memory would be a sensible transport mechanism for Jung's theory. So this is still looking at it in terms of being tentative. But this level of interconnectedness becomes really, really fascinating, you know, especially in the healing world, because when we're talking about beliefs, we're talking about reflections, we're talking about our relationships with other people, it helps to bear in mind that what we see and admire in other people is something that they are showing us as a mirror that we have the potential and the capability for ourselves. So in that admiration is a clue to our own potential and power. So you look at somebody like Nelson Mandela, and most of the world actually has the greatest admiration for him. If we understand that we are all connected with him, we can all be Nelson Mandelas, if you like, and embody those characteristics in our own environment if we so choose to. The case for inherited memory. So let's have a look at some of the work that's been done and what that's showing us. Scientists trained flatworms to curl up when exposed to light by electrocuting them every time the light was turned on. Pure Pavlovian conditioned response. Even more unfortunate for the flatworms is their ability to regenerate themselves if they've actually been cut in half. An amazing thing in itself, cut them in half, and the head grows a new tail, and the tail actually grows a new brain, believe it or not, a new head. When the scientists did just that, they found something bizarre. When exposed to light, both versions of the worm responded according to the conditioning. So they exposed the flatworm originally to the light and observed the conditioning. Then they cut it in half. And then they took the newly generated halves and they actually exposed them both to light, and they had exactly the same response, both sides, whether it was the tail end that had grown a totally new unconditioned brain or whether it was the regenerated head side. How can this be? Common sense and contemporary neuroscience both agree that memory is contained in the brain, which it isn't. So how can a newly grown brain come complete with memories? Therein lies the clue. So now we start looking at the electromagnetic field in which we are all immersed as being the information repository for those memories. So we start thinking about this idea that our memories are perhaps not all of our memories are our own, and that they're not stored physically within our body, even though they might generate an emotional response that we feel physically. Your memories are stored in a field. Okay? And your body responds when triggered by the electromagnetic information that is associated with that memory. Here's another one, strange fact number 2. Take a calf that's been born out of stock that is used to cattle grids. So they take cattle stock across cattle grids, and you take a calf that's born of that stock. The calf might never have seen a cattle grid itself, but if you put that calf anywhere near something that's painted on the road that resembles a cattle grid, the calf actually gets quite distraught and won't cross it. So how on earth can the calf know that it's not even a proper cattle grid, it was something that they painted on the road, but the calf won't cross it? Okay, where's the memory? Number 3, a newborn chick is placed in a room with a hawk. It frantically tries to find cover. It meets a chicken for the very first time and is completely comfortable. So it's terrified of the hawk, and yet it feels comfortable with the chicken. How does the chick that has never met either of these two creatures know the difference between the hawk and the chicken? Okay. People call it instinct, but how is instinct passed from one generation to another? It would have to be stored in the DNA. Well, question mark. An instinct is just a form of memory. So if that form of memory is stored in the DNA, then why not other forms of memory? So we quite easily will, sort of fob something off as just being instinct, and it's something that we pass on from one generation to another. But very often we dismiss the idea of these grander, traumatic, emotional events and memories that we might go through in our lives and the impact that they might have on our descendants and on our children.
Do you think the same holds true for imagination? original.
Well, yes.
Because
Yes.
time is linear.
Yep.
It's not linear, sorry, but it's spiral. We could be imagining, remembering something from the future.
Yes, absolutely. And what becomes really interesting is that you will find that very often if there is something new, a new idea or invention or a thought, is that you might find 2 or 3 people in totally remote, unconnected locations around the world, they all come up with the idea at the same time. 3 or 4 people. So that's exactly the same thing. And it's kind of like nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, because the idea is alive within that vibrant electromagnetic field, and it has been triggered by changing, more global changing conditions. So yeah, that's exactly it. You know, our minds, our thoughts, where do our thoughts come from? We think that we think. Okay, but who does the thinking? This is where you start getting into some of the really philosophical stuff. It's a bit mind-bending. Who's the thinker? Who's the thinker behind the thought? Where do your thoughts come from? You know, and if I want to get into that, I'm actually running an online workshop at the moment called Sacred Mirrors. So I've been doing a lot of putting together of material for that one. And one of the precepts in there is that our thoughts are not our own. All of our thoughts, and I'll just give this to you for what it's worth. All of our thoughts come from our true self, who is not our physical form. Our true self is that aspect of us which is connected to the ultimate divine source. And all of our thoughts come from that. So we think we're in control. Are you getting a taste for like how not in control we actually are? Here's another thing which is really quite interesting. Sorry, that was that bit about the chick and the hawk. So they're starting to look at, you know, sort of traditional DNA and cellular memory as a mechanism. If you take a look inside every cell of the body, there are little organelles called mitochondria, and the organelles are known as the powerhouses, and this is something that I really connected with a few months ago. The organelles produce, the mitochondria produce the energy that keeps our body going. It's the energy for respiration, to metabolize our foods, you know, to sort of keep us running upstairs or whatever it might be. So the mitochondria do that. But in the mitochondria, there is different DNA. There is more DNA. We don't only have one set of DNA in our body. They've actually found some DNA fragments in our blood cells as well. So it's not only in the nucleus of the cell, there is also DNA in the mitochondria. Mitochondrial DNA, if you have a look at this image here, mitochondrial DNA is very different because it actually exists in a circular motion, in a circular form. So it's kind of like associated with the primal archetype and symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail. You guys are familiar with that as an archetypal image. There's the association. And the one, it's only got 22 active genes in the mitochondrial DNA, and it does tend to be under the instruction of the nuclear DNA. However, what's really interesting here, nuclear DNA is inherited as a combination of factors and qualities and characteristics from all ancestors, male, female, whatever it might be. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited from a single lineage. It's carried down the female line. It's only passed on from the females in the line. So what is stored within the mitochondrial DNA is a complete history of all of the women or females that have ever lived. And they've managed to trace through the mitochondria, they have traced the roots of the entire human race back to 6 key hominid women.
Margaret Thatcher.
Hey?
Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, I wonder where she kind of came in with that one, yeah. 6 key hominid women. Now, I found this particularly interesting when I was researching this and looking at this and sort of understanding things probably more from a philosophical and a metaphysical perspective. Because if we look at the world as it is, what do we say about the world? The world actually needs more of the feminine energy in order to be able to counteract the over-inflated, egoistic, evil systems that have actually been perpetuated by masculine energy that's gone awry. Now, that is not a finger-pointing exercise at males. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with being male or female. It's the way in which certain energy has been used. And I thought it really interesting that the mitochondria are known as the powerhouses of the cell, the powerhouses of the body, and it is all the original female DNA. So it kind of says to me, that's where the power has actually been stored. And if that's under control of the nuclear DNA, which has become distorted through the combined ancestral lineages of all ancestors, then it's actually still the amount of power that is realized and released in terms of us acting in the world is still being moderated genetically through the DNA and the programs that we've been inculcated with.
Manipulated that way by extraterrestrials.
That as well.
Yeah.
There is a
Queen's a lizard.
yeah, there is a case for the interventionism. There is also then a huge case for those that have been manipulated, that they've carried on that patterning and reinforced it through their descendants. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say that psychopathic behaviour.
Yeah.
For what you're saying there is, there could well be a kind of lineage of psychopathic behaviour knowingly
Introduced into the genome. Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. You know, I mean, the thing is that there appears to be evidence of genetic tinkering within the human genome as well. So there does appear that there were things spliced and placed into the DNA multiple generations ago, not just the human genome, but in general, because of the spontaneity and the way in which humanity has actually evolved. But part of the diamond research work that I was doing, I came, you know, sort of space weather and all of these events, that even 40,000 years ago, wherever it was, you had the sudden emergence of agricultural crops. And even now, they can't genetically manipulate crops to domesticate previous wild crops. And yet you had the sudden emergence of domesticated crops, domesticated animals, pigs, cows, sheep, that seemed to come out of nowhere. And you had the emergence of the die-off of Neanderthal and the emergence of the modern form of man. And that was like 40,000 years ago. So we're not even going further back than that, where it's likely that there has been prior interference too. So all of that's been passed down. Who here has watched any of Michael Tazarian's work? Brilliant. Yeah, I love it. Love it.
Similar, I was going to say, this is kind of similar to some of the...
Yeah, well, he goes right back to Atlantis. And I must be honest as well, when I was watching some of his work, I had that absolute resonance of truth, actually, with what he was saying. So, yeah, all of that started happening. I think I was actually introduced to Michael Tazarian's work at the same time that all of these ancestral appearances started happening and got me questioning everything. So it's really, really synchronistic. When we allow our lives to be in, for want of a better description, divine flow and guided, these events and synchronicities just, they pop up and they take us in ways that we previously wouldn't expect. And it really is a case of surrendering to the flow. So I can tell you that I haven't been in control of my life for quite some time in that respect. So here was another little, that's that little fact about the 6 original hominid women. At the same time, all of this ancestral stuff was happening down in Wiltshire. I happened to switch on the TV one night, talk about wonderful synchronicities. And there was a QI program, good old Stephen Fry and his panel, you know, and I thought it was a bit of light-hearted relief here, so, you know, watched a bit of QI, and blow me down, one of the questions related to genetic connection with, I can't remember whether the question was about how many people were alive on the planet, but it had to do with interconnectedness and how most of the Europeans alive on the planet today are connected back to Charlemagne in the 13th century. And Stephen Fry took his little card out and he read this fact. And I thought, I don't believe, that he's just delivered this little piece of information, which is so valuable right now. And he said that the research actually shows if you had every single person alive on the planet, so all 7 billion of us at the moment, if you had to take the direct lineages back to the 13th century, you would have had to have 80 billion people alive on the planet if all of our lineages were unique to us as individuals. 80 billion. Now, at that time in the 13th century, they were probably less than 1 billion. So you take, we've got 7 at the moment, you've got a factor of 11 times, and then you've actually got the fact that they were like 6 or 7 times fewer people. So the level of interconnectivity that we have is with at least sort of between 50 and 70 other people who would be carrying and holding very similar genetic patterning in certain respects as what we do. So if we start processing this and we kind of go, all right, so if I am actually carrying a specific pattern that I am dealing with in my life right now, and I choose to heal that pattern, I choose to change my beliefs, I choose to behave in a different way, I choose to actually go through, sort of a healing, psychotherapy, emotional release process, whatever it might be, and I choose to change that. The ramification of one thing that we change positively in our life is broadcast back out into the field, and it will touch wherever that specific element or aspect within the genome is manifesting within 60 to 70 other people. Does that make sense? So it's a powerful thought in terms of what we do being of service in the world. And that brings us to the subject and the understanding of epigenetics, because this whole thing at the moment that's going on, it has been for the last few years, with Angelina Jolie getting her boobs cut off because she's got this gene for breast cancer, and I kind of go, no, I can't believe what you are actually communicating and teaching people. And of course now there's a few people doing that. Oh, I've got the gene, so I'll just actually cut my boobs off, There is no guarantee that even if you carry that gene that you're actually going to express it, because there are epigenetic factors that influence what gets expressed from our DNA. So even though you have a repository of information in your DNA, what happens epigenetically or in the electromagnetic field has a huge determining factor on what is made manifest from that particular storehouse. So epigenetics literally means above or on top of, so it's outside of the DNA. DNA is not fixed in any way, shape, or form. It refers to external modifications to DNA that turn genes on or off. These modifications do not change the DNA sequences, but instead they affect how cells read the genes. So it doesn't suddenly wipe the sequence out, but it tells the cells in your body, because the electromagnetic signature is different, to read the DNA in a different way. And when we understand that one section of the DNA, our genes are not unique either, one gene in your DNA can read up to 200 different proteins. And it can read it in a portion here and a portion there, and forwards and backwards, and sort of bits here and add a bit on there. But one gene in your DNA can read or translate into 200 proteins. Check out Bruce Lipton's work. It's really amazing in this regard. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. So when you realize that one gene can actually do that, you kind of think, well, there's a hell of a lot of flexibility going on here. And epigenetics, epigenetic factors, where it means external modifications or external factors, is not always external to us, as in the electromagnetic soup that we are in. as in, you know, sort of the wireless cloud that we sit in and all of the really tangible physical electromagnetic influences. It also includes things like our beliefs, our ideas, and our emotional content. And they can determine what gets switched on or off in our genes. So by doing ancestral work, by elevating some of those beliefs into conscious awareness and healing the emotional pattern that is structured or bound to that memory or belief, we can change what our DNA does. Does that make sense? It's a powerful thought that what we do ripples through time and will impact not only ourselves, but backwards and forwards, past, generations, and future. It changes the field.
I've always felt that that was true.
And I think that's what's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've always almost known it, known that it was true, but it was always been communicated as this really fluffy stuff. But when you start getting into the nuts and bolts and, you know, you start looking at this, you kind of go, it does make sense. It makes perfect sense. So you may need to, or it may be a good idea to go through hypnotherapy or psychotherapy or, you know, sort of one of those processes. Hypnotherapy absolutely can work. Things like emotional freedom technique, any processes that enable you to deal with, to transform and translate the emotional content that you have around the beliefs that you hold are a vital aspect of your ancestral healing.
Basically, we're saying that the body, physical body, is basically just a computer with a lot of information stored in it.
We program, yeah.
Yeah, from the...
Yeah, it's all stored, so we can decide what we actually want to, read from it. Brain plasticity, here's another great one. You know, we kind of think that we are fixed. We were born this way. You know, it's an easy cop-out sometimes. You kind of go, well, I'm dealing with X, Y, Z, I was born this way. Okay. But now we know that the genes can be switched on or off depending on what's going on in the environment. So we're not as helpless in that regard as we might think we are. Neuroplasticity or brain plasticity also tells us that there is nothing in our brain that is fixed, and it is also now discovered that there's no such thing as we cannot grow new brain cells, which used to be a commonly held belief not that long ago. We actually do create and grow and change our brain through this mechanism called plasticity. So we create different synapses in our brain, which are different connections for the electromagnetic information. When we learn new behaviors, our brain actually structures itself differently. So not only do we affect our DNA, we affect the storage of that information or the transfer of that information through the plasticity of the brain. Changes in neural pathways and synapses due to changes in behavior, environment, neural processes, thinking, emotions, and changes from bodily injury. So we have this real dichotomy between saying we're not in control because our true self, or what is external, is actually in control, and that's where the thoughts come from. But where we do have control is we have choice in how we are going to respond to whatever the patterning is that is held within this body computer. Okay? So we sit with this permanent dichotomy, and we actually have a degree of free will in that particular matter, but ultimately our lives are following a divine trajectory, and that is what we can't change. What we can change and what we can work with is how we actually move along that trajectory and how many other people we can either serve or hurt or uplift or benefit in the meantime as we go along. And I believe that this is really, really important for the state of the world and what we see ourselves dealing with at the moment. And bringing our power back, you know, undoing all of that stuff in the nuclear DNA as much as we possibly can so that we restore power to ourselves and then we can act with passion in the world, which is something, and you guys heard of Andrew Harvey? at all? Andrew Harvey refers to this process of compassion, passion in action, in service as sacred activism. And I think that is just divine. So it's one thing seeking the truth and learning as much as we can. It's another thing to take that and actually begin to put it into some form of action in the world. So I believe it's tea time, is it? Okay. Thank you. It was very interesting because that particular meditation, I don't mind saying it was the end of 2010. It was after I'd sort of connected with these 4 really key shamanic ancestral guardians, if you like, that I called them guardians. And I was told, I was going through a very, very difficult time at that particular time, and my dogs were particularly ill, both of them, and they needed medication, and my funds had dried up completely. So it was like back against the wall, no cash flow. And I just sat down and I said, what do you want me to do? Okay, you know, higher self, big jewels, you guardians, you've contacted me, what do you want me to do? And it was sit down, and on this date you create the meditation, and on that date you put it out. And then both dates were 333. I only realized it afterwards. And on that date you put it out, and you put it out for free. Okay? And you put it out for free, but put a donation link on there. And do you know what? I did that, and I was gobsmacked, because literally within a week I had more funds that had rolled in than I'd actually had in a month doing that. And it was the first time ever I had actually done that and put something out in donation. And that was the degree and the level of trust that I was needed to be able to demonstrate in terms of carrying the work forward and doing even more work with them. So it was quite phenomenal. So that's the MP3 is what I call the 333 meditation. So it's a very powerful ancestral healing journey. So those of you that put your names in, I hope you'll enjoy it. There's another quote from Cloud Atlas. Fear, belief, and love are phenomena that determine the course of our lives, all that emotional content. These forces begin long before we are born and continue long after we perish. So what we do with our lives does matter. Even when we think in our darkest moments that we are insignificant, what we do with our lives counts, and it actually does matter. Indigenous peoples have always understood the need for honoring the ancestors and including them in all healing that they do. It is not ancestral worship, which is the way that it is very often referred to, and in a somewhat derisory sense. When it is actually spoken about, it is not ancestral worship. That was what I used to think that it was. It is an understanding, a very, very deep understanding and an honoring of the natural flow of life, all of life. Okay, that they actually hold us, and they've kept this alive for us. We've just refused to listen. No wonder it is that the Western people are so enamored with the Native Americans that we want to go over there and, you know, sort of take part in their traditions, because our memories of our own indigenous roots have been erased and blocked and conditioned so that we can't remember them. We have indigenous roots. Okay, we have our own indigenous roots. It's up to us to actually find them again and reinstate some of these practices that actually fall in line with the wisdoms that these guys have kept alive for us. The sense of separateness and isolation that haunts so many in the modern world cultures is a direct consequence of ignoring the depths of this connection across time and space. Okay, we ignore the ancestors at our peril. I have to just tell you, one of the experiences that I had after I'd been told to do this meditation and what have you is that I started doing remote alignment work in terms of doing ancestral healing with the shamanic help. So as the shamans do, and this is kind of, I've never been shamanically trained, I just knew that I was kind of being guided to work in that way, and that's really what these guardians were all about. And when the meditation was actually completed and it was going out for the second 333 date, I had one experience, first of all, of just hundreds of thousands of, I could just see them. I can imagine what mediums must feel like when they, you know, sort of crowded with people or whatever, and there's just so many people that want to talk to them. But it was like the doorways to the ancestral realms have been blown wide open, and everybody was clamoring because they all wanted to be here for the party when this meditation was released, when I actually put it out. And I thought, this is just the most amazing stuff. And I started doing some very specific one-to-one remote alignment work with people, actually doing ancestral healing and ancestral clearing through the diamond. And one of the first ladies that I worked with, she's still a client of mine today. We've actually become very good friends. She lives in Israel. And she's always lived in Israel. So I connected with her for the session, and I was given the most profound information. And I just wrote it down as I was getting it, but I could see exactly where her lineage came from, where her parents came from. You know, sort of she'd come from the borders of Russia. One of her parents had come from the borders of Russia, and one of her parents was from further north than that, and she was mixed heritage. The one side was Jewish, and the other side was Catholic. So even though she was in Israel, I don't assume or didn't assume anything. And I wrote all these bits and pieces, everything that I was getting, and I wrote it down. She actually wrote back to me and she said, I'm actually speechless. I don't know what to say because I don't know where you got that information from. How did you know that? You know, people don't know that. And generally, if you've got somebody living in Israel, you would assume, you know, that they're sort of Jewish heritage and what have you. But the level and the depth of personal information that is relevant for the individual at that particular moment in time can sometimes be amazing. Amazing. And whenever I go into these sessions, I never ask the person anything about themselves. I allow whatever is needed for that particular process to be revealed through the connection. And that makes it, every single one of them is an adventure. So it actually is an incredible time. So this is just to reiterate for you, for those who may not have seen it before, why the diamond and why I work with the diamond with this, and why the diamond is actually a vital aspect of the understanding and the working with ancestral healing and ancestral connections. The universe itself, from the very top level of universal spatial arrangement that we see, super clusters of galaxies organizing themselves in space in this shape of gigantic octahedra. Okay? So we see this form that governs and facilitates information flow from the very, very highest level through super galaxies themselves, right down to the DNA. You may remember from previous work as well, is that with the DNA work, I actually struggled for years to say, I know that there's diamonds in the DNA because I've been told that, but I don't know where they are, and I can't find them. And no matter how much research I did and how much introspection, I couldn't find them until one day this dropped in. And it was around about the same time as all the ancestral stuff was happening as well. It was quite an interesting year. Whoops, but if one looks at, we know DNA in terms of its traditional double spiraled form, the double helix that we see coiling around, one strand around the other. But what Rosalind Franklin actually discovered in 1953, which is the reason why Watson and Crick knew that DNA was a double helix spiral, was that if she did, well, what she did do was X-ray crystallography of a cross-section through the DNA molecule, and this was the image that she actually got. And they knew that it was a double helix spiral because of the diamond or the octahedron that it projected into unseen space as a direct consequence of the spiraling. And I went, oh my God, there's the diamonds in the DNA. And they have a huge role to play in terms of the way that DNA, so any diamond light grid work that is done, that you do, that I do, that anybody does at a universal level, planetary level, and what have you, helps to configure the spiraling to hold the spiral of the DNA around the golden mean ratio, so it doesn't get too coiled up tightly or too loose. It oscillates around a golden mean ratio point, and there you then get the more, what's the word? aesthetic and perfect octahedral light that is actually cast. So when you do your diamond work, you actually are impacting the way in which your DNA is able to transmit information. So you open up access to multidimensional realms, and you open up the doorways and the keys in your DNA. Does that make sense? Got it. Because I link everything back to the diamond, because that had such a powerful impact 10 years ago. And I thought, well, it just makes perfect sense. I've got it. Through the structural integrity of our diamond light grid and that work that is done, we gain access to the repository of ancestral information and memory. Collective memory and personal memory. So it's whatever's in our DNA and whatever is actually in the collective diamond fields. We are then in a position whereby we can choose to change the emotions, beliefs, and ideas that are stored here or continue to manifest destructive and non-serving patterns. When we see it, we have the choice. So we make what is unconscious conscious. The unseen diamond that we couldn't see, we make what that reveals conscious from the DNA. What we do matters for our own lives and those of future generations and for life on the planet. Okay? So we're healing fragmentation. We're doing a lot of different things. You guys may know that Dr. Masaru Emoto passed away last week. Was it last week or the week before, week and a half ago, which is a really, really sad loss to the world, because his work was truly fascinating. What he showed us in respect of water crystals was that the quality of our consciousness, the quality of our emotions, the quality of our thoughts impacts on the structural integrity of water. And in understanding this, it gives us the ability to be able to restructure and reprogram the water in our own bodies. And why I'm so fascinated by this particular work, because the hexagon itself, the shape of every single perfectly formed water crystal, is actually a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional octahedron. If the light is actually shone through it at a 45-degree angle, it casts the form of the shadow of a hexagon. So the hexagon arises from the unseen octahedron. Does that make sense? So the diamond is even more significant. So when we maintain the structural integrity of the diamond, we actually help to restructure and recreate the perfected form for life itself. We are restoring the structural integrity of the blueprints of our divine nature and divine form as whole, non-fragmented human beings. So we need to understand, and I think you guys have had so many speakers here and so many wonderful people, that you understand very clearly everything is energy. We are energy. Ultimately, the blueprints that create us are energetic waves and forms. DNA itself, and this is from David Wilcock's work. I don't want to go into too much detail. You can actually, David Wilcock's done some amazing work on this in terms of, sort of putting research together. DNA is a cosmic blueprint. It says that the actual patterning for DNA, it exists in the field. It's not something that's unique to us. This double spiral coiled DNA is the same for every single organic life form, whether it's on this planet or others, okay, within our particular dimensional universe, in our dimension. It's a cosmic blueprint, and its form coalesces in unique ways for every manifestation of organic life. You can change the way in which your DNA expresses what is configured with, which we had a look at with the epigenetics, so we can change our inherited beliefs. Whoops. Every change of idea, emotion, and belief changes the energetic signature of the DNA wave and hence what it expresses. We spoke about the 200 proteins being formed from one gene. We are here at this important juncture in human history to heal all of our ancestral fears, phobias, and fragmentations to the human psyche. The choice to do this sits with each and every one of us. And that's really the bottom line. Because we know, and you guys would know, you would have seen it too. Forget 2012. 2012 was just a marker in time. It was a window. We are at the end of an epoch. We are traversing the end of a cosmic cycle and the opening of a new cosmic window. And that is part of the natural flow of life. Okay, and that is happening. And it is really, really important for us to realign ourselves with that natural flow and with those natural cycles in order to enable the transfiguration of life to be able to withstand and continue into the electromagnetic conditions of the new cycle. So we're flowing into it whether we like it or not. Whether we end up actually still alive as a human race as we move deeper into the cycle is really dependent on what we do now. Ways to initiate ancestral healing. And this is an interesting one, because for all of my many, many years of saying ancestral stuff, don't need to worry about that, that's what's in the past is gone, concentrate on now, on what's in the future, blah, blah. I now have a little corner on a unit in one of my rooms where I've actually set up a really special place where I can actually honor the ancestors, and I actually do this. And I've got a little candle, I've got a, sort of Himalayan salt holder with a little candle in it, and I've got a couple of photos, and I've got a couple of crystals, and I talk to them. So I have actually got, sort of symbols, totems, and that's all you need. You can have a little tray. You don't need a proper altar. Some people suggest you have altars. I've just got a little corner. You can just make it a really special little corner that you set up, where you begin to honor them, because when you do that, you start in motion. An electromagnetic shift and change in terms of the messaging into your DNA. Communicate with them regularly. If you're actually familiar with, if you've got a favorite aunt or uncle or grandfather or grandmother or great-grandmother or whatever that you have a particular connection with, talk to them. Communicate with them. Ask them to be there. Sort of ask them for their help. Ask them for their advice, and trust and listen for the advice that actually comes through. The more you trust your own intuition, allow your intuition to develop, the more you trust your own processes, the clearer and more beneficial the information that you will receive to be able to work with. That I guarantee you. I've been tested over the years over and over. Actively participate in your own healing, knowing that whatever you do for yourself impacts on future generations. And that, if anything, I think is a motivation for whoever's a parent. You don't want your kids to then carry on in future generations all of the stuff that you've been dealing with. It may not look as if they're dealing with it, because maybe their programming and their environment is releasing different patterning at the moment, but they've still got, if we haven't resolved our stuff, they're still able to pass on some of that patterning in their DNA down, so you might find it pops up 4 generations down the line. Think about that one. So whatever you can do to initiate your own healing is going to be very, very powerful. Become a living ancestor. So that's basically it. You become the ancestral guardian for your lineage while you're still alive, knowing that it's something that you can actually carry on doing once you have moved out of physical form and your energetic imprint is actually left in the collective field. So become a living ancestor and honor that process within yourself. Do your own inner shadow work. I can't stress this enough, because what happens out there in the New Age environment very often is very much the follow your bliss, be joyful, only look at the positive side, love and light, love and light, love and light. We don't do dark. Don't do dark. Bollocks. You don't do dark, you're going to get kicked in the butt at some stage. Okay? You have to do, and we have to do, our shadow work, which means digging into the aspects of our psyche, as I've said a few times, and making visible what is invisible at the moment, making known what is unknown, digging for those patterns that we can actually resolve, amend, adjust, transform. Examine beliefs and ideas. Where do they come from? Communicate with that. You communicate with your biology. Where does it come from? You might find out through your own work that, hey, this is something that good old great Aunt Doris was actually worried about. It's actually not even mine, kind of thing. I'm carrying it. What am I going to do about it? Don't be afraid to change. And I know most of you are here. You've actually been through loads of change in your life, which is why you're actually here listening to things like this. So it's just carry on doing it. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep on doing it, because we never stop changing. That's guaranteed. I have a free ebook on my website as well. And in fact, for any of you that have actually put your names on the list, I'm quite happy to send you a copy of the ebook as well. It's a very powerful read. It's called Dumasani's Gift, written by a very, very talented teacher and spiritual teacher called Yasmin Rooney. And she sat down and wrote the book literally within 6 weeks after her father passed away. And as she said to me, she didn't write the book wrote her. She couldn't not write it. It just wrote. And it's the most stunning story that is actually multicultural, multiracial, cross-continental, and it's a story of ancestral healing and how lives are actually intertwined across continents, across oceans, and across racial barriers as a consequence of ancestral events or events that took place in ancestral lives. It's a stunning book. So would you guys like me to send that to you with the meditation? You'll enjoy it, I guarantee it. Yaz is a wonderful, wonderful writer with some amazing insight. And I know that we are coming up to 10 o'clock already. I was actually going to look at taking you through a process, but surprise, surprise, I ended up talking a heck of a lot more than what I thought I might do this evening. so I hope I haven't burnt your ears out too much. I just want to leave you with this is some of the work that I actually do with Diamond Light World, because a lot of people say, well, what do you do? And sometimes I find it difficult to put it in a nutshell. You know, I do energy work. You know, I help heal ancestral patterns, and I, you know, do diamond alignments. So this is kind of what I do. I do energy field or auric field clearing. I do diamond alignments. So it means that I actually help to restructure and reorganize your energy bodies with the configuration of the octahedron. So I do work with clarifying and healing ancestral patterns, and I do what's called soul retrieval as well for anybody that might have an inkling of what that is. It really looks for where fragments of your psyche and your soul have actually been sort of removed from you as a consequence of various traumatic events, whether in this lifetime or others. I do emotional release bodywork, that is hands-on bodywork, very, very powerful process. It's called the Antonia technique. It is hands-on, physical, 2-hour massage to release trapped emotions from the body. We've been talking a lot about emotional signatures, and how whatever we feel emotionally can actually impact on what our DNA does. So what this particular bodywork process does, it's phenomenal. I've worked with it for 14, 15 years, and I actually teach it. And I still work with it. So I'm the kind of person who loves new things all the time and learning new stuff, and I've worked with this technique for 14 years. So that just tells you how alive and dynamic it is in terms of the experiences with it. Was born in South Africa, and I actually brought it to the UK. I run workshops, and I also do online spiritual and personal development programs. So I do them in person and I do them online, sort of when it's suitable. Online just seems to suit a lot of people these days because it's convenient and it's easy. You don't have to go out and it's inexpensive.
Like spiritual pollution is what you're dealing with, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, sort of, and I do community work. I do group work where we clear the grids, you know, all with this understanding. It's all guided. I don't do anything unless I'm guided to do it, basically, you know, because I know if I try and push something through and it's actually not the right thing to do, it won't happen. Full stop. So I do what I'm guided to do. I'll act on that, and that's the important thing that we learn how to do in the natural flow of life. And then just to give you a quick rundown, I'll leave that up there. If any of you are interested in any of the products that are actually sitting here, I've got meditation CDs. I've actually got 3 particular ones which are guided journeys, and each one has a separate music track. They're beautiful meditation CDs. I've got sort of people in South Africa who've been using them for many years. With all of that said and done, what I would like to do is to open it up to find out if you guys have any questions at the moment in terms of ancestral healing or perhaps the relevance and significance.
If we want to heal,
yeah,
things that have been done in the past,
yeah.
How can we pass that to our children through DNA if our children are already born? If we're doing that, it must be some sort of spiritual way rather than DNA.
No, not necessarily, because, well, DNA, if we understand initially what DNA is, and DNA is a wave, okay, and because everything about us is energetic, underlying the crystallization into physical form is an energetic blueprint. And we have chosen a specific energetic blueprint which coalesces and crystallizes the DNA into specific configurations and holding belief patterns. So your children can be born, but there is still an electromagnetic imprint that is governing what their DNA is actually doing. But as you are healing, so whatever you do and whatever condition you may have healed impacts the electromagnetic field that is holding the energetic pattern of the DNA even for your descendants. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's happening at another level, and it can actually still influence the physical manifestation of that. So your healing does matter.
Seem to be speaking to your ancestral shame.
Yep.
That racial groups that exist. So there does seem to be an importance to different races as opposed to the zeitgeist on the planet at the minute where we're told that different racial groups, it doesn't matter, we should all become one. It does seem to, on another level, that race does play an important part.
That's an interesting comment. And an interesting question, because the way that I actually saw it as well, because I was looking at this going, well, what are these 4 guys doing with me? And they are from different racial groups. And my understanding for that is that part of the components, or one of the components of the universal memory, if you like, before we get into the formless interconnectedness of everything and back to this oneness, is that they are racial memories that have been preserved by specific cultural groups, and that we can access the wisdom within those cultural groups through the embodiment of those particular cultures. So yes, they do exist, and it's part and parcel of our journey back into oneness, is to examine the gifts of those various racial groups so we acknowledge that they exist, but we hold without judgment because they are still interconnected as part of the whole. Does that make sense? And once we've actually acknowledged that and worked with the gifts and the healing or whatever it is that they're bringing, then we actually manage to go further back than that into the point of oneness from which we all emerged in the first place.
Why bother?
But it's a journey.
Why bother having different racial groups? Why?
They were manifest with certain belief systems to actually preserve original wisdom on the planet at the particular time that they were birthed, manifest on the planet. So there were different, there were universal symbols that were coming through each particular racial group, and that's what makes it interesting. So there are still universal archetypes that were made manifest by those different groups. But it's, to me, it's probably a function as well of the intervention that we were speaking about previously, where you got verbal communications that became distorted, where one group couldn't talk to another because the languages had actually become mixed up. So I actually think that the racial groups were perhaps part of the creation, the interventionism, and we need to work back through that to heal all of that, to get back to the original form. Does that make sense?
You're saying going back to the original form, and we're talking about ancestral healing. Can we actually invoke healing back into the original ancestors then, the point you call oneness?
Yes.
If we invoke that,
Yep.
will it actually heal all of those that are currently on our planet? Or have we been interfered with in steps throughout that we've got to heal each point?
My personal understanding is that we've been interfered with to such an extent, and there's peeling back the layers. Yeah, we've got to peel back the layers in terms of getting back to the original form. If we actually tried to heal everything all at once, I think the risk to that is that we would probably damage the human psyche more than it actually is already, because of the number of different cataclysms that have actually happened. If you think about it, even in our human life at the moment, now we're talking millennia worth of traumas. If you get somebody who goes through one traumatic event after another in rapid sequence, and you now want to try and heal them or take them back to the original point before all of that happened, sometimes it is actually too traumatic for them to deal with all of it all at once. So they shut down. So actually, from my perspective, it is a gentler process of peeling back the layers and going through it one stage at a time. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule, because you could find very often that you can go back to the original point and heal it. So I don't say that anything is not possible.
It would be nice if you could.
It would be nice if we could.
Events that have happened, which were in our past now.
Yeah. Yeah, but we also have to examine why we want to do that. You know, it's the same as some of the principles in the New Agey environment. You just go into your bliss, just go into the oneness. It's kind of like, it's a need to want to short circuit the process. So we have to sort of ask ourselves whether it's ego that wants us to do that in the controlled personality, or whether it is actually true self that wants us to do that.
If we could do that, wouldn't it allow more people that are in this time to reach the enlightenment?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you use a shamanic timeline to go back?
I don't use any of the traditional shamanic training tools in that sense, other than, you know, sort of going through an honoring process. Because I mean, as I said, I haven't been shamanically trained. I've just actually worked with the guidance that presented itself, and learned from what they were actually teaching through the mechanisms.
Have you ever worked with ayahuasca?
No. Haven't had the opportunity. No. I don't judge it. Pardon me, condemn it. I think it's actually hugely significant, you know, because there you've got that communication line that's opened with other organic life.
So when you stated that you're not a medium,
Yep.
you obviously have the gift of clairvoyance. So do you see people's ancestral families when you're dealing or healing?
It depends, because I work with whatever I am shown or given to work with at that moment in time. So that's the level of trust that I usually go in with. So yes, I do see. You know, and I see things sometimes very symbolically. Sometimes I don't see people. Sometimes I actually see it as colors or shapes, or I actually get messages. You know, so what I usually do is I go in there with an absolute base level of trust, so that I am not influenced by anything that the client may have told me. So I don't ask anybody for information before I work with them, and that's what makes it really, really interesting sometimes. So I just work with what I'm actually going to be presented with and let it happen that way. So that way I know that it's just what's needed, and rather than any judgments I'm putting on it. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah? Is it another difficult one? You can edit this out of the video, can't you?
I'm of the opinion, probably a lot of people in the room are of the opinion that this planet's been controlled by, for want of a better term, an Illuminati.
Yes.
Do you think that there are a group of people that are well aware of what you're talking about and seek to suppress this information?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. It is not, I mean, I've gone through all of that research over the years. The David Icke stuff, the Stuart Swerdlow, and, you know, you name it. You know, my research has really been extensive, and there's no doubt in my mind that there is a controlling body who's seeking to suppress, the kind of stuff we're doing.
There's definitely been a suppression of the feminine.
Without a doubt.
I mean, it's a struggle even now.
Yes.
They're struggling to get women home from the church. Why? Why of all places?
Yep.
You need that feminine energy.
Absolutely.
You know, so that's obviously been manipulated, hasn't it?
All of it, and it still is. I tried to take it into the business world, you know, it was exactly the same. So.
ISIS has been
Yeah.
Well, that's of course it is. That's part of the distorted programming. You know, use that word ISIS for a rebel supposed terrorist group. I mean, that was so obvious and sort of in your face, but the average person wouldn't have seen it. Yeah.
So we focus on the dark side of it. We do believe, we've all read David Icke's stuff here,
Yep.
so we do believe that there is a lot of abuse going on and all of the abuse, it's all being carried out by
Yes.
established authority.
Yeah.
The biggest evil in the world is actually the established authority.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people are awakening now, but there's still a lot more that are not.
You see, I think,
Things like the monarchy, unfortunately, in this group, so a lot of people are still very sentimental about the do wrong royalty, unfortunately.
Well, I think we're all of this, yeah, and I mean, I know I do come across them. Oh, look, Kate was in Stockton today. Oh, I went to see Kate at lunchtime, you know, whatever it might be. It's, anybody noticed how her face and everything else has changed since she got married? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of changes there. I think what makes this, you know, sort of understanding the ancestral healing so interesting is that, and this perpetuation of this evil, overriding, controlling body, if you like, is that it represents for humanity and it represents for us where our power has been given away. So we come back to the power. And the thing is, we tend to think of the feminine and the sacred feminine as being this, you know, sort of quite a soft, motherly, feminine figure. Well, I'd like to hold up Kali as a representation of the sacred feminine, because the sacred mother or the sacred feminine, yeah, there's nothing that can stand in her way when her energy
it's associated with weakness, so if female
is roused. Yeah.
It's associated as being as a form of
yeah.
weakness, as being something.
That's what we need to recover. That's what we all need to get back, is that says no, no more.
Like, you know, when people have gone through trauma,
yeah.
the fragmented parts of the individual psyche that then, because of that trauma, do you not think, like on some level, the Illuminati are the fragmented parts of the universal trauma? We kind of brought the Illuminati into being.
Because of the fragmentation, because of the trauma. And yes, they are absolutely our shadow. And what do they represent within us? We've given them power. That's exactly it. We've given them power. So through our healing, we begin to bring it back. Yeah? And that's ancestral.
So I would argue that they're more slaves than we are, because of the
yes, yeah, that's exactly it.
Every little thing they do is a ritual.
Well, they're also governed very much by the personality ego level of consciousness.
Parasites.
Hey? Parasites. And eventually the parasite's going to kill the host. Either that or the host actually strengthens its immune system and kicks off the parasites. You know, so that's really the essence of where we get to with the recovery process through ancestral healing, is that we become strong enough to shake off the parasites.
Thank you.
Thank you.